President Trump has asked the US Supreme Court to overturn a lower court decision that found many of his sweeping tariffs were illegal. In a petition filed late on Wednesday, the administration asked the justices to quickly intervene to rule that the president has the power to impose such import taxes on foreign nations. A divided US Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit last week ruled 7-4 that the tariffs Trump brought in through an Emergency Economic Powers Act did not fall within the president's mandate, and that setting levies was a core congressional power. And joining us now on this huge tariff war between India and the US is Harry Broadman, former Chief of Staff, President's Council of Economic Advisors. Harry, thank you for joining us here on NDTV 24/7. Firstly, how do you assess the current state of US-India trade ties, particularly in light of recurring tariff disputes?
Well, this is very interesting because these two men, had a bromance in Mr. Trump's first term, and I don't know what happened. I think the issue for Mr. Trump with any country is that when the U.S. is running a trade deficit with that country, somehow Mr. Trump, who, despite the fact that he went to Wharton, doesn't understand that a trade deficit in and of itself is not an indicator of competitiveness over the long run, or how these two large countries should navigate the world trading system to both of their benefits.
Harry, it's taken decades, you would say, also of hard work, both from India and US, to get to the point they had in strategic and economic ties. How deeply would you say they've now been impacted?
Well, I think on one level they will be deeply impacted in Mr. Trump's mind, and I think Mr. Modi is a very clever politician and a clever leader, frankly, more clever than Mr. Trump is. I think that there will be a way for Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump to come together, recognizing that these are very important nations in the global trading place and in other areas, vis-a-vis other big countries, particularly in the emerging markets, that I think they will begin to warm their relationship back to perhaps where it was prior to these tariff issues that Mr. Trump is hell-bent on. And don't forget, he's not just hell-bent on tariffs with respect to India, but virtually every other country in the world. So I think, when one particular country takes offense at what Mr. Trump says or what he does, they should put it into context that those countries are not alone.
So is trade friction then, Harry, a speed bump, or would you say a roadblock in the current Indo-US ties?
I really do think it's a speed bump. I think, cooler heads will prevail and recognize that these two countries have got to get along, not just in the economic sense, but in the geopolitical sense. And I think Mr. Modi, should not take the bait when Mr. Trump leaves it. I think, there will be a way, and I think Mr. Modi may want to think about what he can do to just calm Mr. Trump down. I think, he might get a lot of mileage out of that. And I think there are other people here in the United States who are bending Mr. Trump's ear to not think about India simply because we're running a trade deficit with the country, but how important the relationship with India is in a geopolitical sense.
So to what extent then are US-India tariffs driven by politics rather than economics? Because we've heard so many people from Team Trump come out and say so much against India ever since the announcement.
I think it's driven by both, and I think that is not unique to the India relationship with the U.S., but virtually every other country, maybe other than China. And I think taking this 360-degree view about where trade stands, where security stands, where other issues stand in world peace, I think that's what Mr. Trump needs to get that perspective is in his head. That's not an easy task for him because he really does see the world through trade. And, as you may recall, during his first term, he was referred to as Tariff Man. I think this is probably the return of Tariff Man or Tariff Man 2. But he recognizes in the end that there are other reasons to have a strong relationship with India. And I think Mr. Modi, frankly, if he took the high road, and didn't take the bait, which I said before, I think you'll find that Mr. Trump might calm down a bit. I can't guarantee it. No one can guarantee what Mr. Trump's behavior is, but he's taking trade as a personal matter, less an economic policy matter. And I think wise people on the other side of the table should just let him simmer down, say a couple of things that make him feel better as a person, and then move on to the more substantive issues.
That's interesting. You say it's more of a personal matter for the US president than an economic one. So then should the Trump administration, Harry, be worried by what they saw at the SCO summit last weekend in Tianjin? You had Narendra Modi, you had Xi Jinping and Putin huddled together. Would you say that's just optics, or the possibility of exploring reorientation of ties, something that the US should worry about?
Well, I think the SEO is it's obviously a longer standing issue than this most recent meeting, and it should not be a surprise to anyone that those three leaders would get together. Of course they're part of BRICS, as it were. I think it's important, I think, for those three large emerging markets, India, Russia, and China, to get along well. Whether they're going to have strong economic ties to one another is another question. All three of those countries have very different economic models and different balances of risks and opportunities in their own economies. But they're all very large geographically. And so I think it's not surprising that they would build a relationship. I think, the question is if they believe that their relationship is going to be, outweighing what the G7, for instance, is able to do. I think that's very much an open question. And I think, as I say, mature leaders, mature politicians will rise above that and recognize that we understand why these three countries are getting together. But it's not wise for them to mix the politics with the economics. I think that's of course easy for me to say than do. But I think that's really the perspective that Mr. Trump and Mr. Modi and Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi, should have. And I do think, frankly, if you sit down with each of them bilaterally, they probably will probably get further than having sort of a gang-up session.
Harry, but can Washington and New Delhi afford the prolonged trade disputes at a time when they're trying to deepen strategic ties to counterbalance China? You also have the Quad.
I think this trade dispute is just the meal of the day, and there are longer run issues that can be used to build a stronger relationship. I mentioned the G7 not because I think the G7 in and of itself is important, or the Quad is important in and of itself, or the SEO participants is an important group in and of itself. These are all reasons and paths for these countries to get together to talk about common issues. But in the end, each country is by itself in terms of negotiating with other countries around the world. Don't think that there are not beefs between India, and China, or India and Russia. There are. It's not as if all those three countries get along so well all the time either. I think stepping back a little bit and understanding the dynamics of those relationships, just as if you look within the G7, not all of the G7 countries get along well. After all, Mr. Trump has taken on Canada, our neighbor, to the north. People might raise eyebrows about that, but again, in the context of how Mr. Trump operates, this should not be a surprise.
India has stayed neutral on issues like the Ukraine war. It also has said that we're all for peace in that region. It also continues to have strong ties with Russia. Now, the US president says he's doubled India's tariffs because of the purchase of oil by India. Now, after all that we've discussed, Harry, and coming back to the basic question here, is there more to his tariff decision than just oil purchase?
I think the bigger issue for Mr. Trump, as I said earlier, is that we run a trade deficit with India. I think the oil got in his craw for a whole set of reasons because he's not been very successful in turning Russia around in a way that pleases him. So he's looking for people to strike a relationship to pull out of buying oil from Russia. That's far easier said than done. China is a larger consumer of oil. than India is from Russia. So I think we need to unbundle some of these issues and understand why they're important. It would be fanciful to think that India or China would not buy oil from Russia. And more importantly, as someone who spent earlier in his career a lot of time in the oil industry and understands how it works, it's a very complex industry. And there are very large producers, and it's basically a bathtub of oil. And the question is, whose straw is going to go into that bathtub to seep out the oil? But there are other oil producers around the world that India could make deals with, not just Russia. I think if for instance India were to do that, substitute some Russian oil for oil coming out of Gabon or some other place, I think that would be helpful for Mr. Trump. I'm not advocating that India necessarily do that. I'm just trying to put myself into Trump's head and think, well, what would be a symbolic, gesture, if you will, in quotes, by Modi to sort of ease tensions. But listen, Mr. Trump, is hallucinating if he thinks that India is going to stop buying oil from Russia, frankly.
All right, that brings me to my next question, an important one. How do you see the interplay then between defense partnerships and trade tensions? Harry, can one advance really while the other lags?
That's a very good question, and it's a complex dance, right? I think that's the way to think about this, and there will be ups and downs across those two, tiers of interest. Whether it's military armaments, whether it's oil, whether it's manufacturing trade and the like, and how all these things fit together, it would be naive for any leader, including Mr. Trump, to think that, countries are free to buy and sell what they want to do. But, the important thing is to maintain a personal relationship at the highest levels and build a sense of trust. And I do think that unlike perhaps what Mr. Trump has with Mr. Putin, surely, and what he has with Xi, surely, is nothing compared, I think, to what he was able to establish with Putin the last time Mr. Trump was in the White House. And I think being more reflective about that on Trump's part would be helpful to Mr. Trump. Again, I'm not sure that Mr. Trump is capable of doing that, but that's the way I would assess the situation.
My last question to you, if you were advising then the policy makers in Washington, D.C. and New Delhi, what would be your top 3 recommendations to resolve this tariff friction?
Well, I think the first is to meet, whether it's by video or even better personally. As a former trade negotiator, I find that when you actually meet your quote opponent on the other side of the table, that does a lot for each side to recognize, well, what, we're both humans. Yes, we have different agendas, but we also have a lot of areas of commonality which we need to exploit together. I find that dealing with each other by telephone and not having face-to-face meetings is not a very helpful way of conducting trade negotiations or negotiations of anything, frankly.
Harry Broadman, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us here on NDTV 24/7.